This year's New Year's Eve invitation wasn't really an invitation. It was a statement dropped in the family chat like a stone. "We're celebrating at your sister's place this time. There's no space for you or the kids," my mom typed, as if she were announcing the weather. A minute later, my sister chimed in, casual and sharp, "But you can still come help out, Leo. Just leave the kids with a sitter and do dinner like always." My dad sealed the moment with his usual tone of guilt-flavored cheer, "And don't make this awkward, son. You know we still expect your gifts." I stared at my phone for a while. The screen glowed, full of words that felt like a tradition we never agreed to. I didn't reply. I just went on wiping down the counter and let the silence say everything they wouldn't hear. I'm Leo. 33. Oldest of 3, though sometimes it feels like I'm everyone's parent. I work as a chef, nothing fancy, no white tablecloths or hushed dining rooms. Just a small kitchen tucked inside a busy market hall that smells like bread and steam. I open shop before dawn, when the air is cold enough to sting. I dice onions until my eyes water and the edges of the cutting board blur. By noon, my hands carry the perfume of garlic, oil, and long hours. My kids are the best part of my day. Maya, 7, has the kind of curiosity that never stops humming. She likes to watch pancake bubbles pop and name them like pets. Eli, 5, is my tiny thief, always sneaking cherry tomatoes from the bowl with the stealth of a cartoon burglar. Their laughter makes the apartment feel full, even when the fridge isn't. Their mom and I split when Eli was 2, and since then it's been me, 2 backpacks, and a kitchen that smells like coffee and crayons. Every morning, I pack their lunches in old deli containers, little care packages of love disguised as leftovers. I write labels with masking tape and a black marker, adding messages that make them giggle. Maya, no swapping for wilted carrots, or Eli, eat this before dessert, spy. It's the kind of chaos that keeps me grounded. In my family, I'm the dependable one. The safe bet. The person who says sure, I'll handle it before realizing I didn't have a choice. Reliability looks good in photos, it gives everyone else permission to lean back. When plans fall apart, I'm the glue. When someone forgets to bring the main dish, I'm already halfway to the store. When there's a celebration, I'm the invisible force behind the decorations, the grocery list, the dishes that vanish from the sink while everyone's toasting. Gratitude comes in the form of a half-joke. "You're amazing, Leo. If only we could pay you, but hey, we're family." Val, my sister, has always been the favorite. She's 29, sharp as a pin, with a smile that photographs like an ad. Her living room looks like it stepped out of a design magazine, soft light, perfect symmetry, not a speck of dust. Mom calls her our shining star, and everyone nods like that means something cosmic. I sometimes wonder if Mom remembers that stars burn their brightest right before they collapse. Val's the kind who throws parties where napkins match the curtains and guests post about the food I cooked, thinking it was her idea. I used to care. I used to think if I worked harder, cooked better, smiled longer, they'd finally see me as more than the family workhorse. But somewhere between the early shifts and the bedtime stories, I realized I don't need their approval. I just want peace, the kind that smells like pancakes and sounds like kids laughing over spilled syrup. So no, I didn't argue in the chat. I didn't beg for space at their table or remind them I've hosted them every year since I was 20. I just planned my own New Year's Eve, pajamas, hot chocolate, maybe fireworks if the kids stay awake. Because sometimes family isn't the people who share your last name. It's the ones who stay up past midnight, counting bubbles in the batter and calling it celebration. And that's exactly how Val carries herself, polished, untouchable, like a planet wrapped in glass. Her presence draws people in, not with warmth, but with the kind of elegance that makes you afraid to breathe too close. She's magnetic, and somehow everyone else ends up spinning helplessly in her orbit. Conversations tilt toward her, attention bends her way, and when she speaks, the room rearranges itself to listen. It wasn't always like that. Before the hierarchy settled in, before Mom's compliments became currency, we were just 2 kids in the same kitchen. I was the quieter one, the boy who preferred stirring batter to building forts, who thought the smell of onions sizzling in butter was better than any video game. While Val played dress-up in Mom's scarves, I was measuring sugar into uneven piles, pretending I was discovering a secret language. Recipes felt like treasure maps, each ingredient a clue leading somewhere better than here. Dad didn't get it. He'd slap the grill tongs against his palm and grin at me. "Real men sear steaks, Leo," he'd say, all pride and smoke. I'd tell him the temperature was too high, and he'd laugh as his meat turned from pink to grey. It became our ritual, his smirk, my corrections, the smell of overdone beef. At the time, I didn't know he was teaching me something, that sometimes people would rather be wrong than take advice from you. Praise in our house was rare, like rare coins you could spend only once, and Val owned the whole collection. "Your sister's got such taste," Mom would sigh, adjusting a vase by an inch and pretending it was genius. She'd run her fingers over a table runner and act like she'd touched art. When I cooked, she'd hover with that half smile. "Lo, don't overthink that sauce," she'd say. "I'm not," I'd insist, though my brain would already be dissecting every flavor until it felt like an exam. Cooking became my anchor. Food doesn't lie, it reflects exactly what you put into it. You can't fake seasoning or mask indifference. A stew either sings or it doesn't. There's honesty in heat, in the rhythm of chopping, in the silence that follows when a dish comes out right. Kitchens made sense to me in a way people didn't. Food didn't hold grudges. It didn't praise one person and forget another. It just was. When I landed my first line cook job, nobody asked if I was the emotional one. They just wanted plates served hot and clean. It was brutal and honest, burns, sweat, shouting, but fair. If your risotto was perfect, it mattered. If it wasn't, no one cared how charming your smile was. The thin scar on my wrist, the one from the salamander broiler, still glows faintly pink. I never covered it. It feels like a badge evidence that I survived the heat and kept showing up. Even so, I tried to stay the dutiful son. I repaired things, fetched things, carried things no one else wanted to handle. I unclogged Mom's sink using a wire hanger while she hovered behind me, murmuring about how Val's new drapes had transformed her living room. I drove Dad to his cardiologist, pretended not to notice how tired he looked, then bought him a latte from the cafe near the clinic. "Don't tell your mother," he'd mutter with a wink, as if caffeine were contraband. And of course, there were Val's projects, the pictures that needed hanging, the shelves that leaned. I was her unofficial handyman, stepping over her designer rugs with a level and drill, tightening what she couldn't be bothered to fix. She'd thank me with a distracted smile, already on her phone. Family gatherings were my domain. Birthdays, anniversaries, random Fridays that needed something special, they all landed on my shoulders. Val would volunteer me before I even opened my mouth. "Leo can whip something up," she'd chirp, and Mom would beam as if she'd just solved world hunger. "Something light, sweetheart," Mom would say, already rummaging through the tote bag she knew I'd bring, because of course I'd packed my knives. I always did. "I wasn't planning to cook tonight," I'd mumble, knowing it didn't matter. "You're so talented, honey," she'd say, patting my shoulder, and that was that. So I'd tie on a borrowed apron, open the fridge, and start turning chaos into dinner while everyone else sipped wine and called it togetherness. The clatter of pans was my family soundtrack. And somewhere between the garlic and the garnish, I realized that love in our house always came plated and I was the one serving it. I'd always end up behind the stove, sleeves rolled up, sweat beading at my temples, while Val floated nearby, capturing perfect angles of herself with the soft light spilling across her hair. The kitchen would buzz with her playlist, her laughter, and the faint sound of my own exhaustion simmering somewhere between the pots and the pan lids. The moment that still burns came one Sunday last fall. I'd brought Maya and Eli along for dinner, figuring maybe it was time for a quiet family night. Both kids had runny noses, the kind that come with the first cold breeze of the season. I made a big pot of chicken soup, simple, steady, the kind of meal that hugs from the inside out. I carried it in a thermos, still steaming, and the smell of thyme and broth filled their polished kitchen as soon as I twisted the lid. For a few minutes, everything felt almost right. The table glowed under soft lights, spoons clicked gently against ceramic, and laughter rippled like it used to when we were younger. Eli leaned forward, squinting into his bowl, fishing for the biggest carrot chunk as if he were hauling treasure from the deep. Maya kept blowing on her spoon, counting the steam rings before taking a sip. It was peaceful, fleetingly real. Then Mom glanced at me, napkin pressed against her lips, and said in that careful tone she uses when she's about to rearrange my mood, "Leo, next time you could try something a bit more refined. You know, something that suits your sister's crowd." Her friends appreciate a higher level of flavor. The air around me shifted. I set my spoon down quietly, as if noise would make it worse. My jaw tightened. It was chicken soup for children with sniffles. But before I could speak, Val gave that light, airy laugh she's perfected, the one that sounds like apology but feels like dismissal. "Don't get all touchy," she said. "We adore your cooking, you know that." Dad, between bites, added his own brand of critique disguised as encouragement. "You could work on presentation. Remember, son, people feast with their eyes first." He chuckled, proud of the phrase, oblivious to how it landed. Under the table, Maya's small hand brushed mine. She whispered, "I love Daddy's soup," her voice thin but certain. I squeezed her fingers gently, forcing a calm tone when I said, "Noted." It came out steady, though something inside me cracked a little. Later that night, after the drive home through quiet streets and half-asleep chatter from the backseat, I carried both kids to bed. The apartment was dim and smelled faintly of broth and laundry soap. I bathed them, rubbed Eli's hair dry with a towel, listened to Maya hum nonsense songs as she climbed under her blanket. When the last light clicked off, I stood in the doorway for a long time, just listening to their breathing. Then I drifted to the kitchen. The counters gleamed from where I'd wiped them earlier. I picked up the sponge again, though there was nothing left to clean. My reflection in the dark window looked unfamiliar, someone tired, holding too much silence. I could still hear Mom's words circling in my head, more sophisticated. They rolled around like something sour I couldn't swallow. I thought about how many times I'd cooked just to make them happy, to prove that what I made mattered. But that night, for the first time, it felt different. That comment didn't just sting, it struck. Like a small spark flicking into something waiting to burn. I didn't know it then, but that was the start of a change I couldn't undo, the first scrape of the match against everything I'd been taught to accept. The second spark would come later, a message, a line that would tip everything over, but that moment hadn't arrived yet. Before that, there were years that built up like sediment, tiny requests, passing remarks, quiet transactions that always leaned one way. My life became a slow collection of favors disguised as affection, of IOUs softened by emojis and half-hearted promises. Families have a special talent for this kind of arithmetic, subtracting what they owe, multiplying what you give, and calling the remainder love. It began when I was still young, somewhere in my 20s, freshly out of the house and still trying to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. I was the first to leave, the first to pay rent with coins scrounged from couch cushions, the first to discover that being there for family was actually a polite translation for "Leo will fix it." The messages started small, casual enough to sound innocent. One winter, Mom texted, "Hey, sweetheart, can you spot us $250 for the party trays? Promise I'll send it back Friday." At the time, I was working back-to-back shifts at a cramped kitchen, making 14 and change an hour, my knuckles raw from scrubbing pans. Friday came and went. So did the next one. The repayment never arrived, and eventually the text thread got buried beneath new ones. Then Dad chimed in. "We're thinking brisket this weekend, can you bring one for the vibe?" He wrote, like it was a picnic, not a request. I did the mental math while stirring a pot at work. The meat alone cost more than my day's pay, plus the spices, foil, and 6 long hours of oven heat filling my apartment. "We'll square it up later," he said when I asked. It's family. Later, of course, never showed up. What did appear, though, was Mom's Facebook post the next day, Val beaming, drink in hand, holding one of my mason jars like it was a prop. The caption read, "So blessed." I remember staring at the screen, wondering if she'd meant blessed because of the company or because someone else had quietly footed the bill. When my kids were born, the requests didn't stop, they just changed shape. Instead of money, it was meals, favors, appearances. "You're so fortunate," Mom would say, watching me carry Maya in a sling while balancing 2 trays of lasagna still bubbling at the edges. "Cooking's second nature to you." I'd smile, biting back the truth. There was nothing lucky about it, only muscle memory, tired hands, and a kitchen that looked like it had survived a minor explosion. But nobody wants to hear a chef complain about food. It sounds ungrateful, like a painter whining about color or a musician grumbling about sound. So I stayed quiet, swallowed it, kept showing up. Val's requests were always wrapped in shiny paper, dressed up as opportunities. "You'd love this, Leo," she'd say, voice all sugar and confidence. "It'll be great exposure for your craft." Exposure, in her language, meant working for free while she took credit for the aesthetic. "My brother's a genius," she'd post later, as if hashtags could count as payment. And every time, I'd tell myself it wasn't that bad. That family meant compromise, that someday they'd see what it cost me to keep saying yes. But as the years stacked, those small favors turned into a quiet ledger only I seemed to remember. I didn't know it yet, but the balance was shifting. Each forgotten promise, each polite guilt trip, each "you're so talented" was fuel. And all it would take was one more spark to light it. "Babe, I'm hosting a reveal," Val would announce in that practiced, sing-song voice, her manicured nails tapping against her phone like punctuation marks. "Can you do a few pass bites? Something elegant, minimal, but not pricey. And, oh, no garlic, no onions, no dairy, and no carbs." I'd stare at the ceiling, mentally scanning what was left in the laws of physics. "That's air," I'd reply flatly. She'd giggle, tossing her hair as if it were a punchline. "You're so funny." 7 sharp. It became routine, her calling, me calculating, her events swallowing my time. But none of them compared to that one New Year's Eve 4 years ago. I'd been scraping together savings for months, every extra tip tucked into an envelope marked oven fund. The new convection model for my stall cost $2,800. I was finally at $2,130, close enough to taste it. That's when Mom called, voice light but loaded. "We could use your help for New Year's dinner. Just a few dishes." A few dishes turned into a full-blown production, 6 starters, 3 main courses, and 2 desserts. Enough work to feed a wedding. "Who's covering groceries?" I asked, trying to keep the tone polite. "We'll make it right," Mom promised quickly. "You know the holidays, we're stretched thin." I stood at the grocery checkout later that day, card trembling between my fingers. $412.79. That number burned itself into my brain. I folded the receipt carefully and slid it into my wallet like proof of loyalty, a quiet reminder that I'd done my part again. That night, I cooked until my back ached. The kitchen turned into a war zone of dishes, heat, and noise. I plated shrimp skewers, roasted lamb, glazed carrots, even piped chocolate mousse into glass cups because presentation mattered more to them than effort ever did. By the time the fireworks started outside, I was too tired to watch. The next morning, I texted Mom a photo of the receipt, hoping this time would be different. She reacted with a heart emoji and replied, "We'll square it after your dad's bonus comes through." The bonus arrived, but I didn't see a cent. Instead, Mom posted pictures of Val in Palm Springs, cocktail in hand, captioned "Earned it." The IOU in my wallet turned into something else entirely, a scar in paper form. It wasn't only about the money. It was about hours that vanished without a trace. Hours I could have spent sleeping instead of hauling trays, resting instead of reheating. Time I could have given to Maya and Eli, who started keeping count of how often I said, 1 second. It became their game. "You said it 10 times, Daddy." Maya laughed once, not realizing every 1 sec was a promise I couldn't keep. The small humiliations piled up like dust you stop noticing until the sunlight catches it. "Leo, can you move your car?" Val would chirp, waving her flute of champagne toward the driveway. "Our guests have nicer ones." I'd set down the tray I was carrying, hands slick with olive oil, and shuffle outside to switch parking spots, watching strangers' SUVs gleam where my old hatchback had been. "Careful with the knives," Dad would warn, hovering over me as I sliced beef paper thin. "Those are the good ones." I'd nod, swallowing the words that wanted to escape, and who do you think sharpens them every time? The kitchen always smelled of citrus and disapproval. Then came that July. Val texted about a barbecue, some casual gathering at her place. "You'll grill, right? You're the best with flames," she wrote, as if I were an appliance. I told her no, I couldn't make it. I had tickets to take Maya to the aquarium, a small thing I'd promised her weeks before. She'd been drawing dolphins on sticky notes and leaving them on my fridge like countdowns. When I hit send on that message, sorry, can't. Taking Maya out, I didn't realize it yet, but something inside me shifted. Saying no felt foreign, almost dangerous, but also right. It was the first moment in years that belonged entirely to me. The beginning of a boundary I didn't know I was strong enough to build. Mom's reply came fast, 3 words that hit harder than a slap: family comes first. I just stared at the glowing screen, my thumb hovering above the keyboard, the words blurring into something heavier than guilt. I looked up then, at the small blue jellyfish backpack hanging by the door, the one my daughter had packed herself with crayons and snacks for the aquarium trip. I could almost see her face, bright with anticipation, pressed against the glass watching stingrays glide by. That image made the choice for me. The aquarium won. For 3 full days, the silence from my family was thick enough to choke on. No calls, no messages, just absence shaped like disapproval. On the 4th day, Mom finally texted again, "We forgive you. Next time, give us a heads up so we can plan the menu." Those last words twisted in my stomach. Plan the menu. That was their coded way of saying plan my labor, schedule my hours, organize my effort around their convenience. It didn't stop there. Over time, the requests changed flavor but not frequency. They came disguised as emergencies, wrapped in polite emojis. Just a quick favor. Temporary shortfall. Promise I'll pay you Friday. There were so many Fridays that came and went I could have built a calendar out of them. 200 here to hold us over. 150 until a check cleared. 80 because Val's client ghosted her again. I started keeping track on my phone, a note titled Simply Family tab. Each line carried a date, a reason, and an amount. It looked like accounting, but it felt like confession. I scrolled through it sometimes late at night, half hoping I'd miscalculated. But the numbers didn't lie. After 3 years of temporary help, the total sat at $3,742. I never said it aloud. Naming it would give it shape, and shape would give it weight. And if I felt that weight, I might get angry. And if I got angry, I'd be the villain. Whenever I tried to bring it up, the words dissolved before they landed. "Mom, about those receipts," I'd start. "We're good for it, sweetheart," she'd interrupt, like honor points could balance a spreadsheet. "You know we're not ungrateful." I tried Dad next. "I can't do the next event," I said once. "I'm backed up at work." He just chuckled, not unkindly, but full of expectation. "You'll manage. You always pull through." It sounded like praise, but it felt like a trap. Then there was Val, always polished, always performing. "I need a quote for catering, Val. If you want those hors d'oeuvres, I'll need a budget," I told her one afternoon. She didn't even pause. "Oh, relax. I'll tag you in my post. Great exposure, babe." As if a social media mention could pay for ingredients, utilities, or rent. The moment everything finally settled into clarity wasn't cinematic. There was no shouting, no storming out, no dramatic betrayal. Just a quiet Tuesday evening. The kids were at their mom's place. My apartment was still, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. I sat at the table surrounded by papers, utility bills, invoices, order slips, all whispering numbers back at me. The only sound was the refrigerator's low hum and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Dinner was a plastic container of leftover roast chicken, eaten cold straight from the fridge. My fork scraped against the Tupperware lid as I opened my notes app again, thumb scrolling through every entry. For once, I didn't minimize or excuse. I didn't round down to make it hurt less. I typed the numbers carefully, totaled them up, and stared at the result. $3,742. The sum of every favor disguised as love. Every guilt trip billed as tradition. Every quiet moment where I'd swallowed resentment and called it loyalty. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about realizing I'd been financing my own erasure, one polite message at a time. I added the gas money I hadn't even planned to spend, the babysitter I'd hired just so I could stand over Val's stove without worrying if the kids had eaten dinner. I added the cost of the cake stand, glass, heavy, the good one that I'd replaced after Mom's friend knocked it off the counter and laughed like it was nothing. When I hit the final sum, the total glared back at me, $4,186. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. My thumb hovered above the numbers as if I could erase them by will. I felt something settle in my chest, not anger exactly, but the weight of awareness. The air in my apartment was still except for the faint ticking of the radiator, each metallic click marking seconds that felt too loud in the silence. I took a slow breath, the kind you take before saying something difficult. I could hear my own voice in my head, steady and calm, the same tone I used in the kitchen when a ticket came in wrong. We own our choices. It was something I told my staff to keep them grounded, but now it came back to me like a truth I'd been avoiding. I closed the Notes app and opened a new one. The title came easily, Boundaries. Under it, I began typing rules that felt like small acts of rebellion. I will not bankroll family events. I will not work for exposure. My kids come first, every time. No is a full sentence. Each line felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd been trading away for approval. But writing rules is easy, living by them is the hard part. Families have a way of pulling you back in, of reminding you of what you owe. I wish I could say I sent that list right away, that I stood firm, but guilt is a slow poison. The very next morning, Mom called. Her voice was syrupy, deliberate, like she knew she was asking too much but hoped charm might smooth it over. "We're thinking of doing a little something for Thanksgiving," she began. "Nothing big." I already knew where this was going. "Can you manage the turkey and a few sides?" She added, casual as if she were asking for a cup of sugar. "How many guests?" I asked, though I knew a few in Mom's language translated to a crowd. "Oh, just a few," she said, and I could picture her waving her hand dismissively, standing in her kitchen surrounded by shopping lists she had no intention of filling herself. "You know, just family." Which meant 30 people, minimum. "What's the budget?" I asked, keeping my voice even. There was a pause, thin, sharp, full of judgment. Then she exhaled in that disappointed way she'd perfected over decades. "Don't be crass," she said finally. "Budgets aren't crass," I replied. "They're what adults use to make sure things are fair." That earned me a sigh. A long one. The kind that said I'd failed an invisible test. "We'll talk later," she murmured, which was Mom's code for "you'll come around once you feel bad enough." But later didn't come as a phone call. It came as a group chat. The one titled Family Thanksgiving, ! And all, pinged alive that evening while I was closing up the shop. Messages flooded in like confetti. "Val, so excited. Can we do 2 turkeys this year? Last time everyone loved your citrus glaze. Dad, maybe keep it simple this time. No fancy stuff. Mom, Leo, can you confirm the menu by Friday? We're trusting your expertise." I watched the bubbles appear and disappear, my name being tossed around like a tool, a given resource. Every line assumed I was already in. No one asked if I wanted to host, to plan, to spend. They assumed because I always had. I typed a reply 3 times, erased it twice. Finally, I wrote, "Before I confirm anything, we need to talk about costs. I can't keep covering everything." The chat went silent for a minute. Then Mom's response appeared, short and cold. "We never asked you to." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Because they had asked, just never with words. They asked with expectation, with silence, with the weight of family first hanging like a rule no one was allowed to question. And for the first time, I decided I wasn't playing along. The words were cold and clipped, sharp enough to sting even through the glow of the phone screen. They sat there in blue and grey bubbles, small but heavy, like a fridge note pinned to the last slice of cake you were never meant to eat. The math behind those words was as clear as ever. They wanted more. They always wanted more. And no matter how I calculated it, time, effort, money, the answer was the same. They would take until there was nothing left to give. But the next part isn't about a message thread. It's about the night when the asking stopped pretending to be polite, when the word favor finally showed its real teeth. New Year's Eve. My sister's so-called loft. She loved that word, loft. It sounded artistic, curated, sophisticated. In truth, it was just a narrow two-bedroom with exposed pipes, tall windows, and a jungle of houseplants she'd named like pets: Jasper, Queenie, Fernanda, Mr. Pothose. She'd arranged them along the wall like a green audience, proof of how alive her space was. Mom had declared the plan festive but intimate, which in our family translated to invite everyone we've ever exchanged a polite nod with. The text came at noon, and the phone buzzed with that familiar, anticipatory dread I used to confuse with obligation. This new year, we're celebrating at your sister's place. There's no room for you or your kids, Mom wrote. I reread the sentence twice, thinking maybe I'd missed a word. No room. My jaw tightened. Then, almost instantly, Val chimed in, but leave the kids with a nanny and come cook dinner as always. A moment later, Dad added his own echo, predictable and casual, and don't make us feel bad. We still want our gifts. 3 messages, 3 strikes. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, but no words came. My throat went dry, the way it gets when you pull bread from the oven too soon, pale, underdone, unsatisfying. You know it needs more time, more heat, but you're too tired to try again. So I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I packed Maya and Eli's overnight bag for their stay with their mom. Tiny socks rolled into pairs, toothbrushes wrapped in a towel, Eli's favorite dinosaur pajama top that he refused to sleep without. The normal ritual of parenting steadied me, the sound of zippers, the rustle of fabric, the smell of their shampoo still lingering on their pillows. After they left, the apartment felt hollow. The ticking of the kitchen clock filled the silence, steady and mechanical. I stood by the counter, looking at the chipped edge of the cutting board I'd bought secondhand when I first moved out years ago. It was worn, but it had survived every phase: first jobs, late-night meals, breakups, reconciliations. It had seen me feed people who never said thank you. Part of me wanted to ignore the text, to let the night pass unacknowledged. But another part, the one that had been quietly collecting receipts, keeping track of every favor, refused to stay quiet anymore. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I could see fireworks testing their sparks early, faint bursts of color against the dusk. I sat at my small kitchen table with a notepad and wrote a list. Not of groceries or tasks, but of moments. Every unpaid meal, every quick favor, every dinner where my food filled their table while I ate scraps after everyone else had gone home. I thought about the time Val called me last minute because her caterer fell through, which really meant she'd never hired one. About Mom insisting I drive across town on a Tuesday night to save her dinner party. About Dad saying, "You're so lucky, son, to have a talent you can share." As if luck was what kept me up at 2 a.m. scrubbing pans. By the time midnight approached, I still hadn't answered the group chat. My phone kept buzzing with updates, photos of Val's decorated living room, champagne bottles lined up like trophies, captions full of hearts and glitter emojis. "Family time," one said. "Love this tradition," said another. But it wasn't a tradition. It was a cycle. I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window. Outside, the city pulsed with noise and light, strangers cheering, cars honking, fireworks blooming over rooftops. Somewhere in that chaos, I felt the faintest sense of calm. For once, I wasn't part of their performance. The night was quiet, but inside me, something finally shifted. It wasn't rage or bitterness, it was resolve. For years, I'd been cooking for people who never once thought to feed me. That was about to change. Val folded her arms, the shimmer of her bracelet catching the overhead light like a warning. Her expression settled into that practiced smirk she wore whenever life got mildly inconvenient for her. "You're seriously doing this now?" she said, voice pitched halfway between disbelief and condescension. Around us, conversation slowed, the kind of hush that falls when people sense a story forming, the kind they'll later retell in whispers. Mom's hand fluttered toward her glass, the way it always did when she needed to stall. "Leo," she said, soft but sharp, "this isn't the time or the place." "Every time and place becomes this," I answered, steady. "You make it this way." The room wasn't loud anymore. Even the playlist, some jazzy New Year's mix Val had queued up, sounded tinny and far away. I could hear the clink of ice in a tumbler, the shuffle of heels across the floor, the faint pop of a champagne cork from the balcony. Val gave a small, incredulous laugh. God, you're so sensitive. You could have just said no. I did, I said. You just never listened. Dad exhaled through his nose, a sound halfway between irritation and exhaustion. You're overreacting, he said, like he was narrating the weather. This is family. Families help each other. Families don't turn one member into staff, I said, sliding the invoice toward him. The paper made the smallest sound, just a whisper, but it might as well have been thunder. That's not helping. That's working without pay. He picked up the sheet, glanced at it, then set it down again like it was radioactive. You think you're some kind of martyr? No, I said. I think I'm done. Mom's face pinched. Leo, please. You're embarrassing us in front of everyone. Embarrassment, I said, is realizing I've been feeding you for years while you talk about me like I'm a utensil. A cousin near the drinks table coughed and muttered something to his girlfriend. She nudged him, eyes wide, silently telling him to stay quiet. The air in the room thickened. Val rolled her eyes, turning her attention to her phone. Fine. If you're so miserable, just don't come. Nobody's forcing you. You did, I said quietly. Every time you texted last minute. Every time you said, just a few bites. Every time you called my work a hobby. She looked up at me then, really looked. I saw a flicker of uncertainty, the kind that comes when someone finally realizes the ground beneath them has started to shift. This isn't a big deal, she said weakly. It's a pattern, I said. Mom tried to smooth her voice. Leo, honey, can't we talk about this later? You're upsetting your sister. I laughed once, small, sharp, humorless. She'll live. She's used to getting what she wants. Dad's eyes narrowed. Watch your tone. Why? You never watched mine before. You just used it. For a moment, nobody moved. Then I took the invoice back, folded it cleanly, and slipped it into my coat pocket. You know, I said, I used to think I kept showing up because I was loyal. Turns out, I just didn't want to admit you'd never meet me halfway. Leo, Mom said again, but her voice had gone thin, brittle as spun sugar. I turned toward the door. I hope the oven doesn't smoke, I said over my shoulder. You might want to check the broiler setting. Val frowned. You're really leaving? I didn't look back. Yeah. I've got somewhere better to be. Outside, the hallway felt colder, freer. I could still hear the muffled party noise, music, laughter, someone shouting Happy New Year, even though it was only 9. I walked toward the elevator, my reflection flickering in the polished steel doors. When they opened, I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the doors slid shut, I caught one last glimpse of the apartment, light, noise, my family frozen in their little constellation of disbelief. For once, I wasn't orbiting them. By the time I reached the street, the first fireworks were already blooming over the skyline, scattering red and gold across the night. I stood there for a moment, letting the sound wash over me, feeling the cold sting of air on my skin. Then I smiled, small, quiet, but real, and whispered to no one, Happy New Year. You always make everything about money. No, I insisted, you do. Every situation is framed around my finances, my hours, my effort. I'm speaking about something far deeper, respect. Mom's voice softened, then cut through the room like a sharpened blade. We are family. Precisely, I said, and that's why I'm approaching this without hysteria. I'm not preparing dinner. If a professional chef is what you need, my rate sheet is available. If you want your son, I'll attend, but only for an hour. The atmosphere shifted, heavy and electric, like the sudden silence when a favorite song stops mid-verse, revealing the cracks it had been masking. Aunt Leia moved cautiously toward me, her hands raised in conciliatory gestures. Sweetheart, surely you could contribute a little? Not like this, I replied, firm. Mom's gaze narrowed, flickering with a mix of disbelief and irritation. After all we've invested in you, I raised a hand, halting her before she could speak. This isn't retaliation. It's resolution. Dad let out a derisive snort. Resolution for what? I stepped closer to the counter, gesturing at the chaotic spread of half-chopped vegetables, scattered spices, and gleaming knives. Resolution for being the default laborer, I said. For being reminded constantly that family means I provide free work, but my children are invisible. For the hypocrisy of being told I have no place at the table, yet my hands are always welcome. Vel moved forward, tone low and dangerous. You're destroying my celebration. I glanced around the kitchen, at the island crowded with unfinished preparations and forgotten utensils. Your joy was built on a foundation of disregard for the people who make it possible. Every garnish, every tray, every menu item was meant to highlight me, yet you refused to acknowledge my presence beyond utility. Aunt Leia lingered, torn between urging compromise and holding back. Mom's fingers tapped against her chin, a nervous rhythm. I stayed rooted, voice steady, allowing each word to settle over them like an unshakable truth. I'm not here to argue about tradition, inheritance, or appearances. I'm here to set boundaries, finally, after years of being overlooked. If recognition, respect, or gratitude is too much for you to offer, then perhaps this event should continue without my labor, my energy, or my children. Vel's face hardened, lips pressed thin, eyes darting to the kitchen clock as if time itself were conspiring against the tension. Dad's shoulders slumped, but his pride didn't waver. I folded my arms, letting the silence do its work, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of a spoon against a mixing bowl. Your celebration cannot exist on the erasure of those you claim to love. For a second, I thought Dad would erupt, his voice slicing through the quiet. Instead, he leaned back, fingers drumming lightly on the armrest, and said, "If you walk out, don't come back." I nodded, letting the weight of the words settle like dust in a sunbeam. That's a boundary, too, I murmured, almost to myself. Mom's jaw tightened, the sharp angle of it more pronounced in the dim light. At least don't make a scene, I told her, my voice soft but firm. I'm being very quiet, I added, surprising even myself with the calm precision of my tone. My heart didn't hammer or stutter. It felt measured, deliberate, like plating a complicated dish I'd prepared countless times, each movement purposeful, each breath practiced. I retrieved my coat from the guest room, the fabric stiff from long months of hanging, and traced the familiar path back through the living room. I placed the invoice on the counter, a silent declaration, a truce flag etched in numbers and restraint. Its edges caught the chandelier light, sparkling like paper-cut diamonds. As I reached the door, Mom's voice lingered, softer but with the familiar undertone of command, "We still expect our gifts." I paused, turned slowly, letting the words roll off me without recoil. "You're getting one," I said, my tone clipped but unwavering. It's called me not lying to myself anymore. Then I left, the door shutting behind me with a quiet, final click. The elevator swallowed me whole, its polished steel walls reflecting a tired, resolute face. Lines traced from exhaustion and months of endurance, but my gaze was steady. Midnight erupted somewhere above with fireworks and laughter, but I sat on my couch, a bowl of reheated soup balanced in my lap, and typed a simple, heartfelt message. Happy New Year to two small people who were my North Star, the only ones with permanent claim to my devotion, my labor, my love. The morning light spilled across the apartment floor, and by the first few hours of the day, 23 missed calls blinked insistently on my screen. By noon, the count had climbed to 41, a relentless tide. 3 voicemails from Mom shifted from frost to tremble to a weaponized nostalgia that made my chest ache with familiar guilt. 2 calls from Dad, clipped commands disguised as guidance, "Call me back and grow up." 7 texts from Val, a photo of a tart collapsed like my patience, a video of sparkler fountains igniting briefly in the night, a paragraph dissecting how my energy ruined her carefully curated mood, and a single, pointed sentence, "You should apologize to Mom." I sat, the phone buzzing relentlessly, soup cooling in the bowl like a metaphor I couldn't ignore. And for the first time in years, I let the noise exist without responding. I let it all hang there, unresolved, but mine no longer, like a storm I was finally willing to watch from the window instead of standing in. I set my phone screen down, the black glass reflecting the morning sunlight, and pulled out the flour and eggs. The kids came bounding in later that afternoon, hair wild, laughter echoing off the walls. "Happy New Year redo," I said, flipping pancakes thick and golden, letting the batter drip like molten gold into the pan. We carried them to our living room fort, blankets thrown over chairs, cushions piled high, and ate with our fingers, syrup dripping down small chins. The world outside could roar, but in that fortress, everything was soft, warm, and ours. January 2nd arrived with a ping. Aunt Leia's message stretched across my screen like a rope, beginning tenderly with, "I love you," and ending with a plea, "Just help them this once." I typed, erased, retyped, deleted again, 4 cycles of indecision before sending a response I could stand by. "I won't be discussing this via group text. If Mom and Dad wish to address the future respectfully, I'll answer. No arguments about what's already done." I anticipated silence, a quiet settling like dust on untouched shelves. Instead, the messages escalated, concern garbed as urgency, slicing into calm. "Mom, we're worried about you." Me, "I'm fine." "Mom, you've always been sensitive." Me, "My boundary is healthy." "Dad, your mother couldn't sleep last night." Me, "That's unfortunate." "Dad, we're disappointed." Me, "I know." Meanwhile, Val curated her version of life online. A carousel of Instagram images, each frame carefully constructed, each smile perfectly polished. Slide 1, cheerful brunch. Slide 2, champagne bubbles catching light. Slide 3, the collapsed tart I hadn't touched, sugar spilling across the counter like betrayal. Slide 4, laughter staged for effect. Slide 5, Mom's eyes too bright, staring through the screen as if to remind the world and me that nothing was ever private. I sat back, fork idle, syrup sticky on my fingers, watching the tiny fortress wobble under the weight of half-baked pastries and half-ignored messages. The kids laughed, unaware of the storm swelling beyond the blankets. Their warmth anchored me. Outside, notifications flickered like persistent shadows, but inside, pancakes, sticky fingers, and small victories built walls I didn't have to defend. Evening crept in with long golden streaks across the floor. I cleaned the counter, the scent of browned butter filling the kitchen, and glanced at my phone, silent now. I let the messages pile without answering. Each ignored ping was a brick, fortifying boundaries, reclaiming the space I'd lost for years. Outside, the world clamored for control, but here, at least, I dictated the rules. The caption ended with, "Some people care about themselves more than others." I didn't respond. I silenced alerts and shoved my phone into my bag, letting it settle under receipts and a half-crumpled apron. The market smelled of onions roasting and cinnamon, the usual chorus of vendors calling out prices, children tugging at parents' hands. For a moment, it felt ordinary, familiar. The same woman returned, ordering the roast chicken sandwich she always praised, her eyes lighting up as she took a bite. "Tastes like Sunday at Grandma's," she said, and I smiled, the edges of worry softening. A boy lingered nearby, shy, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, asking about knives. His gaze was eager, ambitious, untainted by family drama. "Whichever you'll sharpen," I told him. A small, innocent truth. For a moment, the buzzing rectangle in my pocket almost didn't matter. Then came January 4th. A Google spreadsheet from Val arrived, blinking on my laptop. Leon contributions, the subject line read. I opened it. Columns stretched endlessly, family dinners, holiday brunches, brunches I hadn't even attended. Food costs, market rates, credit for exposure. The final row calculated imaginary Instagram value against hours I had actually worked. And in the conclusion, as dry as tax code, I owed them gratitude. I froze. The cursor blinked at me, judgmental. I exhaled, closed the window, and stared at nothing for a long second. Then I typed a single, careful sentence. Please send any invoices for services you believe you provided. I will do the same. I followed through. Hours later, a single document left my outbox, $4,186. Historical reimbursements and labor credits. Net 30. A note at the bottom outlined new boundaries. Going forward, my availability is limited. Bookings require deposit. My children are not optional. It sounded detached, clinical even. But beneath the lines, there was liberation. The least emotional action I had taken in years was also the most decisive. Minutes passed. My phone rang. Mom. Her voice was sharp, incredulous. Is this a joke? No. I answered evenly. You're charging your family. I'm collecting what was promised. That's not how love works. Love doesn't demand hiding children or working for free. You're punishing us. This isn't revenge. It's closure. I repeated it, slower, for clarity, because new concepts need repetition before they sink in. Closure. Respect. Boundaries. Accountability. The line went quiet. Static hummed for a moment. Then, faintly, her breathing sharp, ragged, unsure. I didn't flinch. For once, I wasn't apologizing for existing. For once, the work of the heart wasn't about kneeling, it was about standing, fully present, fully myself, while holding the tiny, unshakable constellations that mattered most, my children. Even as the phone rested back in its cradle, the spreadsheet, the notifications, the entitled expectations, all of it seemed smaller. My life was no longer an open ledger for others to exploit. It was balanced now, carefully, irrevocably, with terms I dictated and respect I demanded. She changed approach suddenly, shifting tone like the weather. We'll talk when you calm down, she said. I blinked at the phone. I'm calm right now. The line went dead. The following week unfolded like a slow parade of minor invasions, each encounter intentional and uncomfortable. Dad appeared at my stall, ostensibly passing by, then planted himself directly in front of my line, his presence as heavy as an uninvited shadow. So, you're really doing this? His voice carried far enough for every nearby customer to catch the edge. I forced a smile, the muscles in my jaw stiffened but my words stayed smooth. What can I get started for you? He scowled, stepped back, and left without ordering anything, leaving the lingering scent of cologne and disappointment behind. Later, Val dropped off a bag outside my door, the fabric rustling as I lifted it. Returned presents I had carefully chosen for her children: puzzles, books, a sweater dotted with tiny embroidered rockets. A note flopped out with a sharp crease, "Until you apologize." I gathered the items, feeling a mix of irritation and pity, then drove to a local shelter that welcomes donated toys and clothing. Each package was labeled with my children's names, Maya and Eli. On the receipt, I scribbled, "Happy reading." The next morning, the market manager pulled me aside, concern etched on his face. "Everything okay, Leo? Your dad came by." He seemed intense. I straightened, wiped my hands on my apron, and assured him, "I'm handling it." My words were calm, but my pulse hummed with the residual tension of their intrusion. Home was quiet in a different way now. Not vacant, not abandoned, just open like an empty field after harvest, wide enough to breathe. I started filling it with things I had neglected for too long. A parent-teacher meeting arrived, and for the first time, I actually sat through it, instead of lurking by the door like a sprinter waiting to dash to someone else's kitchen. My attention stayed focused on the tiny human in front of me, absorbing everything her teacher said. Later, I taught Maya to crack an egg with one hand. 10 attempts. Half a dozen shells sacrificed to persistence and giggles. Her hands, small and determined, trembled slightly with concentration. We laughed when yolk dripped onto the counter, cleaning it together, sharing a quiet triumph over a simple culinary challenge. In that same week, Eli discovered he could fold paper airplanes that actually flew, and we turned the living room into a miniature runway. The air smelled faintly of flour, egg, and crayons. For the first time in months, the apartment felt like a place of invention, not obligation. The outside world, the arguments, the ultimatums, the persistent messages still existed, but inside these walls, it didn't reach us. We were creating, learning, failing, and trying again without judgment, our own rhythm taking root amidst chaos. And then she nailed it, cracking the egg perfectly on the counter, and shouted like she'd scored the winning goal of a championship I'd never played. Eli tied my apron around his tiny frame, chest puffed with mock seriousness. "Chef Eli reporting for duty," he declared, voice squeaky but commanding. I wanted to cry quietly into the bowl of mashed potatoes, laughter and love mingling with the sting of memory. I started jogging along the river path 3 mornings a week, legs moving slow but relentless, lungs filling with cold, sharp air that smelled faintly of wet leaves and exhaust. Coffee at 10 p.m. became an afterthought, a habit abandoned simply because I was awake enough to choose differently. The calls and messages didn't stop completely. They arrived like clouds on a partly sunny day, sporadic, sometimes heavy with anger, sometimes slick with persuasion. Then came nostalgia, carefully wrapped in sweetness meant to tug. Mom, remember when you made cinnamon toast for Val after school? Me, yes. Mom, you were always such a good brother. Me, I still am. Just not a doormat. Silence. Then the familiar sting of money entered the frame. Dad texted, "Your invoice is unreasonable. We've done things for you, too." What things? I replied. Rides, support, family. I returned a revised spreadsheet, meticulous and deliberate. Each line item documented with screenshots, where Mom had typed "will reimburse," the hours I rounded down, the gas costs I hadn't claimed. I added a second page, credits applied fairly, 2 cakes I wrote off because they were for grandma, love outweighing ledger balance. The new total, $3,930. I pressed send, chest steady, mind clear. By day 29, Mom sent, "Can we have more time?" "Yes," I answered. "Net 60, she replied, adding a heart emoji. Then came the subtle pull, "Please bring a salad to Aunt Leia's birthday Saturday. It would mean a lot." "No," I typed. "But I'll come for an hour with the kids." "It's a seated dinner," she shot back. "No kids, then it's a no," I responded. She didn't answer. I went anyway. Aunt Leia always carried warmth like a soft scarf. I arrived with flowers tucked under my arm, Maya and Eli trailing, fingers sticky from snacks, laughter echoing through the hallway. We stayed precisely an hour. When Mom attempted to tug me toward the kitchen, a tower of plates in hand, I stood firm. "I'm not working tonight." Then I returned to the floor, elbows smudged with crayon, coloring dinosaurs alongside Eli, letting the world outside fade. Driving home, Maya's small voice asked, "Are we in trouble?" "No, baby," I said, hand resting on hers. "We're doing something new. It feels weird at first." Day 45 brought another message. Val's email appeared in the inbox, subject line blinking with that familiar sense of expectation. It contained a link to a catering company, a subtle nudge, a reminder that the old patterns, requests, manipulations, hidden rules were still waiting. But this time, I felt ready. Ready to see them, weigh them, and respond on my own terms. Ready to protect my children, preserve my energy, and honor the boundaries I had spent months building. Even as the car hummed down the street, headlights tracing familiar sidewalks, the world no longer felt like it controlled me. Each mile home was a measure of freedom, each laugh from the backseat a quiet rebellion against old scripts I refused to replay. "Since you're busy," I replied quickly, tapping out words with deliberate calm, "Great choice. Their rates are fair. Book early." The click of the send button felt small, almost trivial, but it marked another boundary firmly placed. On day 60, the mail rattled through the slot. Among the usual advertisements and bills lay an envelope slightly thicker than expected. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a check, not the full amount, but $1,500, accompanied by a sticky note scrawled in Mom's familiar handwriting, "Good faith." I placed the check beside the invoice and snapped a photo for record. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, then typed, "Received $1,500. Remaining balance, $2,430. Net 30. It felt absurd, documenting a family debt with the precision of a small business, yet beneath the absurdity, a pulse of vitality thrummed. I was alive, fully aware, present in a way I hadn't been for years. Then, something shifted unexpectedly. Mom sent a message without the usual emojis, without subtle manipulation. "I miss the kids. Can we see them Saturday? No cooking, just visit. 2 hours." I exhaled slowly, considering it. I suggested our apartment, a neutral space where lines were clear. "We'll order pizza. You can bring a board game." Saturday arrived, sunlight spilling through the windows. The first 15 minutes were stiff, measured, full of small silences and sideways glances. Then Eli, ever the performer, told a joke about broccoli. It wasn't funny, nobody laughed at the premise, but he delivered it with confidence, and Dad chuckled despite himself. Maya adjusted the board game pieces, Mom corrected the rules just twice, her hands gentle instead of exacting. By the time they were leaving, Mom approached and hugged me briefly, arms stiff, eyes wary. "You're stubborn," she said, a mixture of exasperation and grudging acknowledgement. I smiled faintly, replying, "I learned from you." And for a heartbeat, we shared a moment of understanding, a smile that didn't carry edges. The remainder of the money arrived a week later, in the form of a cashier's check. No notes, no commentary, only the cold arithmetic of numbers stamped on paper. I placed it beside the original invoice, the stack neat, controlled, a symbol of accountability. Handling it, I felt a curious mix of satisfaction and emptiness. Closure had a quiet weight. After that day, the apartment felt lighter. Toys remained on the floor without judgment, markers left uncapped, bowls stacked patiently in the sink. The children's laughter bounced off the walls freely, no one asking for hidden labor or unspoken sacrifices. Every pizza slice shared, every board game played, became a small act of reclaiming time, a rebellion against old obligations I'd once accepted without question. Evenings stretched longer, quieter, not hollow but expansive. I drank tea instead of coffee, listening to the soft scrape of Eli's crayon on paper, the rustle of Maya's sneakers as she danced across the living room. Outside, life hummed insistently, full of obligations and expectations, but inside these walls, for once, I dictated the rhythm. I deposited the check and shut the Notes app, the tally still blinking faintly on the screen. Triumph didn't ripple through me. Instead, a quiet equilibrium settled in my chest, steady and unfamiliar in its simplicity. Life felt measured, neither rushed nor forced, the numbers no longer a weapon but a record of accountability. The next invitation arrived a few weeks later. Spring sunlight warmed the subject line, "Would like to host a small thing. You're welcome with the kids. No work required. If you want to bring something, bring yourself." Skepticism prickled at the edges of my mind, but I accepted. I packed a dozen assorted muffins from the bakery, a subtle act of rebellion disguised in sugar and paper cups. Pettiness, I decided, could be delicious when neatly portioned. Val lingered by the window with a Bloody Mary, sharp red against the pale afternoon light. "You've changed," she observed, tone equal parts curiosity and accusation. "Not really," I replied. "I just stopped paying for the same lesson." Her eyes narrowed, lips pursed. "You think you're better than us?" "I think I'm better to myself," I said firmly, and the words hung in the air. She didn't like them, but she didn't hand me a cutting board either, a small victory cloaked in civility. That night, after the children were tucked in and breathing slowed into sleep, I sat at my table, the one where menus, bills, and grocery lists usually claimed dominance. Tonight, it became a sanctuary for a different kind of organization. I wrote a list of rhythms rather than tasks, routine school drop-offs without sprinting, a measured 2-mile run, stretching with the sunrise, hydrating, inventory on Tuesdays, not midnight Sundays, pancakes for fort-building mornings, naps protected by boundaries. Because I am a chef, discipline mingled with creativity. I added teaching Maya how to perfect bechamel, guiding Eli to fold chocolate chips in last for optimal melt. The phone buzzed occasionally, small tremors in an otherwise steady stream of hours. I still said no, calmly, without fury. The calls gradually transformed, softened into normal questions. "What time is the recital?" Or "Do you want the kids Saturday?" It wasn't magic. It was deliberate, precise, a recipe I was stubbornly following, measuring and tasting, adjusting as I went. Some nights, I think of my sister's tiny oven, its heat sweltering in ways that once dictated my movements, the way Mom's voice thinned sharply when I dared to refuse. I don't feel thrill in recalling it. Instead, a strange calm envelops me, a sense of permanence and protection I had never allowed myself before. Kitchens are often described as places of fire, of temper and chaos, but for me, it has become a place of balance, of control, of nourishment, not just for bodies, but for boundaries, for self-respect, for a family I am finally free to shield on my own terms. The muffins I brought that afternoon. They sat on the counter like tiny medals of survival, and even Val, with her judgmental eyes, had to admit, Sometimes, small gestures speak louder than yelling or spreadsheets. And as I swept crumbs off the table, I realized the heat I used now wasn't destructive, it was sustaining. They're also about timing. Knowing when to stir, when to rest, when to open the oven and trust the heat has done its work. This, I realized, was mine. Life didn't erupt like a volcano, didn't overturn overnight. It simply clicked into place, a mechanism long ignored now moving with precision and calm. My name is Leo. 33 years have brought me scars, laughter, and the steady rhythm of a kitchen. I am a chef. I am a father. I am learning daily to value each fragment of my attention, to assign worth to hours once taken for granted. I've learned to say no without trembling, to let silence settle when truth lands like a knife against dull metal, clear and clean. $1,186 isn't a wound anymore. It's a boundary carved firmly in the ledger of my life, a line I refuse to cross for convenience, guilt, or expectation. Val still curates her illusion of perfection on screens that never sleep. Mom still issues reminders about being polite, her voice carrying the weight of habit. Dad continues grilling, literally and figuratively, trying to sear control into moments I no longer surrender. But now, amid the chaos, they ask differently, what works for you? And sometimes, my answer is simple, unapologetic, nothing. My children have learned with me. No doesn't erase love. No doesn't diminish care. No doesn't fracture connection, it protects it. Eli once observed, with the clarity of a 6-year-old philosopher, boundaries are like oven mitts. And in that moment, I realized he understood. They shield, they safeguard, they allow heat to be endured without harm. So here's the recipe, if you want it. Write the bill with precision, every task and promise accounted for. Set the timer for yourself, not anyone else, and follow it. Serve only what belongs to you. Protect the ingredients that nourish your spirit. If anyone declares there is no space at their table for you or your children, make your own. Carve out your own surface, set down plates, light candles, invite laughter and warmth. Fill it with the love you can give freely, without compromise, without guilt. In the quiet aftermath, when the kitchen hums and dough rises and children chatter about trivial victories, I understand, mastery isn't about control. It's about presence. It's about knowing which moments to fight for, which to let be, which to season with patience and self-respect. And sometimes, the simplest dishes, the ones measured in respect, in care, in unwavering yes or firm no, become the ones that feed you most fully.